Eliud Kipchoge, the man, the myth, the legend. For almost an entire decade, his unbroken winning streak over the marathon distance has left the world in complete shock. However, on October 4th of 2020, this record-breaking winning streak at long last came to an end. Unlike his previous races where he made running 2-minute and 50-second kilometers look absolutely effortless, Kipchoge's 2020 London Marathon was certainly different. Throughout the race, he experienced many different issues that have simply never happened before. From missing his water bottle to the loss of his classic form over the closing stages, this performance has left many people asking, what exactly happened in this race? And is this the end of his marathon dominance? Now, there's a lot of different information floating around about what exactly happened in this marathon, so for this video, let's take some time to break down each racing factor individually. First, we simply cannot ignore the weather. At the starting line, the weather was windy, rainy, cold, and in all honesty, the weather was absolutely miserable. In fact, before the start of the race, as the camera panned over to the great Eliud, you can clearly see that he was actually shivering from the frigid conditions. Now, typically, a cold race is no big deal for the world's best marathoners, and even Kipchoge himself has seen solid racing results while running in the cold. But when you combine the cold, the wind, and the rain, oftentimes even the world's greatest have massive struggles. If we rewind to the 2018 Boston Marathon, where the weather was absolutely abysmal, a staggering 60% of the professional field actually dropped out, a clear indicator that these cold, adverse conditions most definitely affected the world's greatest runners. This was one of the strangest and most dramatic races I've ever seen, and even though the elite fields were stacked with talent, many of the pre-race favorites didn't even finish. In a 2006 study from the University of Connecticut, research showed that performances in the cold and the rain severely affected the body's ability to maintain a proper core temperature. This occurs because even if an athlete is wearing multiple layers to stay warm, cold water can in fact seep through your clothes and cause many different racing struggles, even a very quick onset of dangerous hypothermia. Now, it's unclear as to whether or not Kipchoge had this exact issue for the London Marathon, but the cold and the rain clearly played a significant role in his overall performance. Next, let's take a look at what Kipchoge himself was complaining about after the race, and this was a blocked ear on his right side. According to both Kipchoge and his coach, after the 25-kilometer mark, his right ear was severely affected, which only opened the doors to more and more issues, including a loss of balance, a cramp on his right side, and impaired vision. This ear blockage is definitely abnormal for marathon racing, but according to multiple outlets, there is a very simple explanation for this problem. If we look at the London Marathon course, we can see that the athletes were constantly running in a clockwise motion, only making right turns for 26.2 straight miles. In fact, if we take this one step further, this course was 19.5 laps, and if we multiply this by 4 turns each lap, we arrive at a final turn count of 78 total turns. Given the nature of this race, the athletes' right ears were constantly exposed to both the wind and the rain, and sadly for Kipchoge, his right ear did in fact suffer from such a racing structure. But why didn't this happen to the other athletes? If Kipchoge had such struggles, why did nobody else have any ear issues throughout the entire race? Well, there's simply no real explanation for this. But it is worth mentioning that the eventual winner, Shura Katata from Ethiopia, was wearing a headband for the entire race, ensuring the safety of his ears against the frigid wind. Next, let's take a look at Kipchoge's fitness coming into the London Marathon, and how exactly it compared to his previous competitions. Now, it's unquestionable that all athletes in some way were affected by the global lockdowns earlier in the year. From Ethiopia, Kenya, and even Uganda, many of the various training regimes were put to a severe halt just a few months prior to this marathon showdown. Specifically for Kipchoge, his primary training location for the past decade has been the Global Sports Training Camp in Kaptagat, Kenya. This camp is home to many of the world's greatest distance runners, and for the first time in its entire history, the camp officially closed due to the global pandemic. This was certainly a severe blow for Kipchoge, who has been one of the biggest advocates for group-based trainings for the past decade. But even in the face of this large uncertainty, he did manage to push forward and continue his training alone. For well over a month, he was almost exclusively running at 6 a.m. from his house, and even though this training, where he was still running well over 100 miles each week, was still world-class, it's almost a certainty that he missed out on many great training sessions with his teammates, and because of this unfortunate disbanding, his fitness was certainly negatively affected. One final factor that I personally think played a big role with Kipchoge was the fact that he hadn't run a single race in almost a year. The last time Kipchoge laced up for a big competition was at the Ineos 159 Challenge, which occurred on October 12th of 2019. But even for this event, he wasn't racing against other athletes. He was only competing against the 2-hour marathon barrier. Now, yes, Kipchoge did run a 159 marathon like a total boss, but a time trial is much different than an actual race. The official last time that Kipchoge ran a race was on April 28th of 2019, when he competed in last year's version of the London Marathon. Again, for this race, Kipchoge initiated warp speed and completely buried his competition. However, this was over 1 year and 5 months ago, which is actually the longest racing drought in Kipchoge's running career. All in all, Kipchoge had to endure many different challenges just to finish this race. From his ear problem to the cold conditions, to not even racing for well over a year, his performance at the London Marathon this year was a product of many different struggles, the likes of which we have never experienced in the past. Moving forward, what exactly does the future hold for Eliud Kipchoge? Will he run more marathons? Will he be competing in the Olympic Games? Or will he never quite again return to his previous marathon form? In just 1 week, the great Kipchoge will be turning 36 years old. And while he is certainly entering the twilight stages of his career, he was very quick to answer the question as to whether or not he would eventually return to marathon racing.
More marathons in you?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Still more marathons on me, and I'm still there. I'm still there to come back again.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, until next time.